Vadim from MaxTech thinks that the M2 Pro and Max will be built on 3nm because of the 18-month update cycle, and I don't agree. So today's show was going to be a super easy iCave answers. However, one of the first questions that I came to was from Mark Graf asking, iCave answers, what do you make of the latest M2 Pro/Max video from MaxTech? And he included a link. Now, I watched this yesterday, and I think basically throughout the whole video I went, nope. So let's talk about that. Want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours? Subscribe and ring the bell. Now, first off, I have to just, as a little disclaimer here, I have to say I'm a huge fan of what MaxTech does. They do the best, and I mean the best, testing basically of any channel on YouTube. 100% respect to the guys for that. I also talk to Vadim quite often on Twitter, and we get on really well, so please don't take this as any sort of personal attack. I think he's got one thing wrong in this video, and it's kind of thrown off a bunch of the other stuff, and I completely understand why he thinks it, and it's that 18 months thing. So, let's talk about why.
I'm going to explain why I'm now fully convinced that Apple's M2 Pro and Max chips will actually be built on TSMC's brand new 3nm process node technology, contrary to the mainstream belief that they'll be based on the M2 chip's 2nd gen 5nm node. But trust me, by the end of this video, I think you'll be convinced as well. Now, in my opinion, I think early 2023, specifically at a spring event, makes the most sense for the launch of these MacBook Pros, and that's because I fully believe Apple's fall events will be consumed by the release of the redesigned M2 Mac Mini, the M2 iPad Pros, and potentially even the new Mac Pro.
I think we will be having M2 Pro and M2 Max chips based on 5nm, and I think they'll be out before the end of 2022, not in early 2023. I've said that from the beginning, that I think Apple will do a 12-month update cycle for Apple Silicon, at least pretty much once the transition is completed, and for me, now that M2 is here, that is the indicator that we've got to the end of the transition period. I know that the Mac Pro isn't here yet, but I feel like that kind of sits outside of the general Mac update cycle anyway. I understand why that's kind of doesn't really fit, and Apple themselves said that that's part of the transition, but you see where I'm coming from. This is not one of the basic Macs that needs to be refreshed, but I still think we'll be seeing that before the end of this year, just to be clear. So why does all of this make sense to me? So Apple Silicon is based off the same cores that their engineering team, Johny Soruji and co., make for the iPhone every single year. Now, Johny Soruji couldn't have emphasized more how Apple Silicon is designed to be a scalable architecture because it uses the iPhone's A series performance, efficiency, and graphics cores inside the chips.
Welcome to our lab. We've been building and refining our Apple Silicon for over a decade. The result is a scalable architecture that is custom designed for Apple products, and it leads the industry in features and performance per watt.
The big difference is, of course, how many of each you get. With the iPhone 12 and its relatively tiny battery getting the A14 with 4 efficiency and 2 performance cores, then the M1 doubled up the performance cores up to 4, and also doubled the GPU cores from 4 to 8. Now the M2, which is the next version that we've seen, takes the A15 chip with 5 GPU cores and doubles that up to 10, while again upgrading the internal CPU cores from the A14's Firestorm and Ice Storm cores up to Avalanche and Blizzard cores from the A15, and again you get 4 efficiency and 4 performance in the M2. So Apple is basically designing these CPU cores and GPU cores on an annual basis for the iPhone. So why on earth would they decide to do an 18-month cycle for the M series chips? Now, there is precedent for it because the M series chips, the M1 is basically an A14X with a little bit of sprinkles on top, so you got your Thunderbolt controllers and all that sort of stuff. However, and things like hypervisor, which is I think Rene Ritchie's favourite word. But basically, it's an A14X. Luke Miani did all the numbers and worked out what the A14X would look like if it was powering a Mac. He did all the maths, worked out the performance scores, and was within like 2%. We were pretty close as well, because it's basically an A14X in terms of performance. Now, the X chips, the AX chips, did kind of come every 18 months or so, and they did skip generations, but that was because they only went into an iPad and occasionally an Apple TV or something. Whereas now, there's a huge number of products that will benefit from these, like the whole Mac range.
I fully believe that Apple is switching to an 18-month or 1.5-year timeline 4 major Mac updates.
So if we were doing 18-month refresh cycles, that means you'd get 1 year when the cores are nice and fresh alongside the iPhone, like with the M1, and then the following year they'd be 6 months out of date already. And the following year, they'd just have to skip a whole generation to get back into sync. That would also make it really annoying when you're trying to work out which generation cores are in which chip. And I know Apple doesn't care about that, but we do, and it makes my life harder, so please don't do that, Apple. The thing is, then when you did those skip years, you would have a massive comparative leap in performance every couple of years, which means that people would learn which generations to skip. So it would be like the S years for the iPhones. You wouldn't bother. Also, it makes perfect sense for Apple to build an annual cadence for the updates to the Mac, just like they do with the incredible success on the iPhone, the Apple Watch, and the base iPads, and I would guess most likely all of the iPads from this year onwards. Knowing that the new M chip will be released each year at WWDC would be a huge boon for Apple and a boost for back-to-school sales, as the vast majority of students need a reasonably affordable laptop and don't need a pro-level tool for that. Perfect timing. Knowing that the MacBook Pro with Pro and Max chips are coming in the fall also makes sense, and once we have our newly designed Mac Mini, it can get its M chip in June along with the iMac and the other M series stuff, and then the M2 Pro or M3 Pro, etc. in the fall each year. Want to get a Mac Studio with an Ultra chip? That will be the spring event around the end of the tax year, when bigger businesses and studios need to either do a tax write-off, use up the last of last year's budget so that they still get their full budget allocation for the next year, or just wait a little bit so that they get that next year's budget allocation to buy one. That could also be the perfect spot for Mac Pros as well. So having that clear annual cadence makes a lot of sense. It calms investor worries because they love predictability of cash flow, and in the past Apple was always constrained by waiting on Intel and AMD releases to update their machines, and yet they still managed to do an average of 350 days between updates on the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air models in general, about a year. So it seems bonkers that they would move to their own silicon where they have full end-to-end control and then slow down their releases? Waiting for 3nm for M2 Pro and M2 Max? I mean, I'd love it, but I don't think they will, even if Vadim at MaxTech is absolutely convinced. The whole video that he made seems to hinge on this theory of the 18-month refresh cycle, and I honestly think that is a flawed premise. I think that we've seen delays in the initial release because of other new tech, primarily Mini LED display panel yields. This October for the new MacBook Pros just makes sense to me, as it's a simple chip update. They would need as much attention as the 13-inch MacBook Pro got at WWDC. The Mac Mini with its design refresh, if that happens, along with the M2 Pro and M2 Max chips, would be the star of the show as usual, with the M2 iPad Pro probably going to make an appearance as well. Then September can just have the consumer stuff like the iPhone 14, the Apple Watch Series 8, please let it have flat sides, and the consumer iPads, the base one and the Mini. These are the A series ones. The Air will get an M2 next spring. It all falls into place. That means you've got an iPad at each kind of section of the year. You've got Macs at each section of the year, and you've got your big consumer push right before the holidays. It just makes sense. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll get into your iCave answers from yesterday from the same place. Randomness R asks, iCave answers, will the 14.1-inch iPad get mini LED? There's rumours saying yes and no. Which is it? Okay, it looks very much like a no. It doesn't look like it's going to get mini LED. It looks like it's going to be a consumer model, which is interesting. I think it's just going to be called iPad Max, probably. That would be the most sensible thing. The Pro is going to be the Pro ones, and from what Ross Young is saying, now he's said this in his super follower stuff on Twitter. I recommend you get in there if you're really interested in this stuff. I'm not going to show his tweets on screen because that would be disrespectful, but he has said that he expects that Apple will keep anything sub 13 inches to be for the iPad for a Pro, and anything above 13 inches Pro to be in a MacBook. That's what he's said. The 14.1 inch display that we're looking at for the iPad is not going to have ProMotion, and it's not going to have mini LED. It is an edge-lit LCD panel by all accounts. So no, it's not going to be Pro, it's not going to have ProMotion, it's not going to have mini LED. Grant Preston asks, hi, love your show. If you're going to say which actor you look the most like, you most closely resemble Curtis Armstrong's character in the beloved Revenge of the Nerds, if you know what I mean. No, it's definitely Billy Butcher. Yeah, alright, I look like him. Thomas Rabenstein asks, iCave Answers, I was most pleased to hear in the keynote that No Man's Sky will be ported to the Mac. That would be a AAA game that really interests me. Any word on when it will be released and if it can be purchased directly through the App Store? My guess here is that it will be App Store based because Apple has featured it so heavily. No idea when it's going to be released. I have a feeling it's not going to be that soon, maybe 6 months out, something like that. But Apple has a bit of a history of doing this when they used to invite Epic onto the stage to talk about Infinity Blade and things like that. It was never out straight away. It was normally in September. So maybe September, October time, that might make sense. Of course, it might drop onto the App Store as soon as we've had the M2 MacBook Airs arrive. Who knows? Randomness R asks, iCave Answers, will the 15-inch MacBook Air get mini LED, and are we expecting a 15.2 inch or a 15.6 inch screen? Please do your due diligence to get to the bottom of this, thanks. So, I've had a look through everything from Ross Displayman. He hasn't given any detail on the size of the display, but if it's going to be in a MacBook Air, I would say no to mini LED. I would also say no to ProMotion. It's going to be a basic Retina LCD, liquid LCD display, the same as in the 13.6 inch. Don't know exactly what the size will be. I would think it would be on the lower end though, so that it kind of doesn't impinge on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. But that remains to be seen. And this, remember, is still not an expected product. It is something that is in development, so they may well be looking at various different display sizes. Randomness R asks, iCave Answers, are we expecting a full redesign of the iPhone 15 with USB-C? I'm using an 11 Pro Max at the moment, but looking to update. If the design changes and we get a USB-C Thunderbolt 4 port, I would love that. What else are you expecting from the 15 Pro Max? Thanks. My big hopes, I think it's a little bit dangerous to be kind of expecting stuff this far out for the iPhone 15s. However, maybe John Prosser's designs that he leaked for the iPhone 14 are in fact the 15, because the 14 doesn't appear to have any real design changes, so it could well be that that is a prototype for the next redesign as opposed to the next generation. That would be my best hope. So let's just fingers crossed that we get dropping down to just a hole punch instead of a full-on notch, or the weird like pill cutout thing that we're getting this year, and maybe the flatter backs without the camera bumps. That would be really nice. That does give you a lot more space, batteries and things like that in there, but it also gives you more room if you're going to have the periscope cameras and all that sort of stuff that we're expecting too. Randomness R asks, iCave Answers, when will Apple add the subscription iPhone service in Canada and Apple Pay Later? I hate how stuff like this stays in the USA only. Very difficult to tell. The subscription iPhone thing isn't even in the US yet, as far as I know. It's something that we've heard rumours of, I believe. I don't think you can subscribe to the iPhone. I think they do the iPhone upgrade program. They do that in other countries as well, so you can get that in the UK. I guess you can probably get that in Canada, but they don't do a subscription model. That was something that was being discussed, but it's never been announced. In terms of Apple Pay Later, again, hasn't launched anywhere yet, because that is basically financial services. It's very much like Apple Card and all of those things. That is very different from country to country, and Apple will probably just focus on their primary market of the US for that. Maybe China will get it at some point, but I wouldn't hold your breath for Apple Pay Later anywhere outside the US, really. Alan B Unboxings and News is back with iCave Answers. Do you think the iPads could get MagSafe 3? It's difficult to know what you mean by MagSafe 3 because we don't really have MagSafe 1, 2 specifically. I know there were on the MacBooks. They've changed that again for the new MacBooks. I don't think it's backwards compatible, so that would almost be the third generation already. We've also got MagSafe on the iPhones, which is the puck style. It looks like that's the most likely to come to the iPads, where we get a larger ring on the back of the iPhone, like a larger Apple logo potentially, which is where the charger puck would stick, and that's what it would charge through. That's the potential that we hear at the moment. I don't think it's going to get a physical cable attachment MagSafe style with pins, if that makes sense. If they do, then there's I guess there could be a way that they would attach that through something like the smart connector that they have for the keyboards. That would be a really good thing if they could just magnetize that and have a stick-on that goes over there. But then we're getting into even more different versions of MagSafe, and why call it all MagSafe at that point? W.A. Blinko asks, iCave Answers, do Apple record their promotional videos on iPhone? If not, how long before they do? Would be one of the best things to add at WWDC. Yeah, that would be a really cool way for Apple to to kind of promote the iPhones as well. Now, they certainly do record promotional video on iPhone, all the stuff for the cinematic mode, for example. There have also been movies made on the iPhone, but in general, Apple is using just incredible, like probably some of the most expensive cameras in the world based on how nice their footage looks. The HDR on it is spot on. They use very deep depth of field, so they have very crisp, clean, clear backgrounds. They don't go for the shallow depth of field very often that you would see in a lot more cinematic stuff. They tend to go very crisp all the way through, so that's why it kind of looks like they're green screening it sometimes, but they are not. Randomness Art asks, iCave answers, how soon do you expect MagSafe to start transferring data on iPhones and iPads? You know what? I don't think it ever will. I thought it would for a while. I thought they might use ultra wideband in it. I thought they might do something along those lines. But I've got a feeling that Apple has no real interest in doing that, because we've got Wi-Fi, we've got cloud, we've got all sorts of stuff. And in most cases, it's pretty much as fast as using a cable. I just don't think that that's going to happen. It would still be a wireless transfer, so what's the point in having it between that and that instead of like to your computer that's a couple of inches away? I don't really see the benefit. When you can use Wi-Fi just in the background, when your iPhone's just wandering around the house, to kind of back up to the cloud and then pull it down from the cloud to a computer, I'm not sure that it matters. And although we're here in the tech sphere and we're the people that are kind of going, oh, but I've got ProRes video on my iPhone and I need to get it off, the vast, vast, vast majority of people never transfer anything off of their iPhone onto a computer. The vast majority of people are not moving image or video files from their phone to the computer in any kind of volume. The fact they can airdrop a photo is probably as much as they're ever going to want to do. Now, what Apple could do, produce a little airdrop receiver for Windows, maybe. You have a physical device that you plug in as a USB device, and you can use that to basically airdrop to. I mean, that would probably be just as effective, I would say, and then the software takes over from there. But I don't think MagSafe is going to be a data transfer protocol, sadly. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for spending your time to get all the way to the end of this video. If you've got a question for me, hashtag iCaveAnswers down in the comment section. Thank you to all of the Patreons. And we have a new one, Daisy in the Rain. Thank you so much for joining the Patreons. If you want to join, iCaveDave.com/Patreon. Want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours? Subscribe and ring the bell.